Welcome and welcome back to those of you who have been with us throughout the course of today's event. So, welcome again to our second thematic panel of the Virtual Investment Forum. This panel, with the theme Building Partnerships for a Sustainable Blue Economy, will focus on the vital role of collaboration between public and private sectors, local communities, and international stakeholders. The panelists are invited to share their insights on how to build effective partnerships that support sustainable growth and innovation in the blue economy. We are delighted to announce that Jennifer Doherty-Bigara, Senior Climate Change Specialist at the Inter-American Development Bank, will be moderating this session, and she will be joined by the following esteemed panelists: Slav Gatvic, Managing Director, The Nature Conservancy; Mark J. Spalding, President, The Ocean Foundation; Brandon Murphy, Environmental Economist, The Proper Foundation; and Melanie Andrews Bacchus, Senior Technical Officer, Caribbean Natural Resources Institute, or CNARI. I now hand it over to our moderator to kick us off on this session.
Thank you, Sania, and welcome everyone. I'm very happy to be moderating today's panel on building partnerships for a sustainable blue economy. Thank you all for being here. It's important to, again, underline the importance of partnerships. I think we do that often, but nonetheless, it is important to underline that coordination, collaboration sometimes takes a bit of time in our agendas, but it does bring extreme value added to any operation we do, especially in the sustainable blue economy. So today, I'm happy that I'm actually talking to some of the partners I've already have, and also looking forward to continue partnering with some of the ones that I'll be speaking with today. I'll go, straight into the subject, talking first to Slav. Welcome to the panel, Slav. We're talking here about sustainable island developing states. And we know they're facing the most ravaging climate change impacts, and they're also dealing with high level debt. So we've been working together, and I would like you to please share with us, how do instruments such as the Debt for Nature work and allow to close nature-prone investments while being conscious of the macroeconomic realities, which is something I'm sure most of our audience will be interested in, since they've seen it in a lot of media lately. So please, Slav, would you be able to share with us some of this?
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to all the organizers. We appreciate all the partnerships that we have with people in this virtual forum, and we want to build on those. As our CEO likes to say, and we practice what we preach. We're big believers in radical collaborations. And that's why just at the very last Biodiversity Summit, COP in Cali, Colombia, we announced just one of those partnerships with the world's leading non-governmental organizations focused on conservation and climate. And this was a NGO partnership for sustainable debt that we announced. And we believe that these partnerships with the likes of WWF, Conservation International, and many others will be able to unlock billions of dollars towards conservation and climate resilience projects in the Caribbean and around the world. Speaking of which, many of you may know the Nature Conservancy is the world's largest conservation organization, and we're proud to call the Caribbean our home. We are in many countries and territories in the Caribbean. We're in 17, actually, stretching from the Bahamas to Grenada. And indeed, with IDB, we were pleased to collaborate on one of the first debt conversions for the Caribbean, the one in Barbados, which we closed 2 years ago, which is an example, involved treating $150 million of pre-existing relatively expensive sovereign debt, and as a result, unlocking 50 million for conservation in Barbados, allowing the Mia Mottley and her visionary government to move from practically zero marine protection to the global goal of 30, protecting 30% of Barbados's ocean. And I know it's in the public domain that now Barbados is actually working again with IDB and with EIB for a follow-on debt for climate swap, which will allow it to invest in the necessary infrastructure to provide municipal water treatment and other benefits for climate resilience and nature. Of course, climate and nature at TNC we see as two sides of the same coin. Unfortunately, both are severely underfunded, Jennifer, due to some of the reasons that you highlighted. The fact that there is this negative dynamic between the negative effects of climate change and high debt levels, which are then preventing your countries from investing in your own nature for the benefit of your own people. And so through debt conversions, through our nature bonds program at TNC, we're trying to strike right at the heart of this problem by refinancing pre-existing expensive debt with these new facilities that are risk mitigated through friends such as IDB, but also USDFC and other multilateral agencies, such that the new issuances are actually can be funded at much lower cost than what your countries can do by accessing the capital markets directly. So we've done already 5 of these, and other NGOs have done a couple more. So the 5 that we did have raised well over $1 billion, $1.5 billion of new sustainable issuances, and more to the point, have unlocked over $500 million in conservation funding. And again, it's very important to understand that this conservation funding is generated de novo. It doesn't add to national indebtedness. It doesn't further burden already stretched national budgets. And that's what makes it so important. On that note, we were very pleased just last Friday, so it's very, very hot off the press, to announce our latest Nature Bonds project with IDB and other partners for the Bahamas this time, where we together refinanced $300 million, again, of pre-existing expensive debt, generating $124 million, again, at no additional burden to the Bahamas government and its budget for marine conservation over the next 15 years. And that involved a radical collaboration among IDB with 2 private sector participants, an impact investor, Builders Vision, and also a private insurance company, which sort of, demonstrates that private investors can be crowded in a very deliberate way to provide these guarantees alongside with multilaterals, thus stretching the ability of multilaterals to have this impact. And then, of course, you tap in private investors and private lenders to actually fund the loan. So in this case, it was Standard Chartered, the commercial bank, that funded the new loan. And the savings from the transaction, again, the $124 million, they flow through an independent conservation fund that's already pre-existing in the Bahamas. So we are not reinventing the wheel where there is institutional arrangements that works, then we use those. And so that conservation fund will receive the money over time and will downstream it in the form of grants to government agencies, local cooperatives, local NGOs, businesses towards the goal of effectively managing Bahamas's protected areas. So hopefully that's a helpful introduction.
That's a lot of information, Slav, but I'm happy to see that you are including the private sector. It just proves the need for, yes, solid and bold partnerships to ensure that this is sustainable and very much is trying to address and meet ambitious targets such as the 30%. When we talk about these innovative instruments, we're also wondering about the credibility, over time, because we've tried some of them, and in the past we've had good and complicated experiences. So how would you say that, this credibility is built over time, and how does it rely heavily on the implementation phase? Could you share in a few minutes, what are the local impacts, and what do you consider to be on the ground the lessons learned to very much bear in mind when we're talking about debt for nature conversions?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, implementation is really everything, right? We're not even a bank; we're an NGO, right? So we're doing these like you would to see the long-term positive results on the grounds and in the waters. And we at TNC see ourselves as a long-term conservation partner of the government for years to come, much beyond the original closing date of a deal. That's why we don't refer to them as deals. We refer to them as projects, long-term projects. And so we work with you, other like-minded partners, and of course, governments, local communities, indigenous people to actually implement these programs. So that's why we use these conservation funds as well, because they're a form of public-private partnership as well. They have an independent board where the government is on the board, but nobody has a majority on the CTFs. And so, then the CTFs have their independent board, independent staff. They evaluate calls for proposals and distribute the funding unlocked from the transaction in an apolitical way that's aligned with the point of the program. And so we're seeing now already some very useful lessons learned and some successes. One of the first ones that we did was in the Seychelles, now 6 years ago or so, and the government, through our help, completed already a marine spatial plan and is gazetting more than 30%. Actually, they're exceeding the 30 by 30 goal there. Closer to home in Belize, we already have that closing was in November of 21. We already have many rounds of funding, the Belizean Conservation Fund downstream to businesses and government agencies. There is a very active marine spatial plan that's going on that's involving working with local communities, with fisher folk, with the tourism industry to understand where to put the new and improve marine protected areas, and do so in an ecologically, but also in an economically sustainable way, so that long-term sustainable jobs are created as part of these ambitious conservation programs.
Thank you very much, Slav. So many things to keep unfolding, but I can see already that some of our, some of the audience is already reacting, and we'll have a couple of questions to share. But I'd like now to turn out to Mark. Welcome, Mark. You're here with the Ocean Foundation, and we're talking about the private sector. So one of my questions would be, how can investors effectively engage with the blue economy opportunities in the Eastern Caribbean? Because this is, the focus of today's panel. SIDS are a specific kind of area of influence. So what can you share with us about these investors and how to work effectively in the Eastern Caribbean?
Thanks very much, Jennifer, and thanks for the organizers for inviting me. I'm really pleased to be here. Effective engagement in the Eastern Caribbean's blue economy starts with building trust and building solid relationships with local governments and development banks like the Caribbean Development Bank, or the IDB as well, which can provide crucial market insights and partnership opportunities, introductions even. Investors should focus on sustainable fisheries, aquaculture, coastal tourism, and renewable marine energy projects that really align with national development priorities in the countries in the Eastern Caribbean. Working through established regional frameworks like the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States and CARICOM is essential to ensure that the projects meet local regulatory requirements. Engagements should prioritize capacity building and knowledge transfer with local communities while utilizing blended finance mechanisms that combine private capital and development funding in order to manage risks. There are, however, challenges that are faced here. The primary challenges in developing blue economy partnerships include limited access to reliable data and metrics for measuring project impact, making risk assessment difficult for investors. Infrastructure gaps are also a problem, particularly in port facilities and cold chain logistics, which can hinder project implementation. Climate change vulnerability poses significant risks to marine resources and coastal assets, requiring robust adaptation strategies. Limited technical capacity in some territories requires additional training and skills development investment up front. And then, of course, one of the problems we all experience working in the Caribbean is a lack of harmonization. And so thinking about harmonization of regulations across different island nations is also necessary to facilitate regional scale projects. Access to appropriate financing mechanism remains challenging, particularly for smaller scale projects that may not meet traditional investment thresholds, but are crucial for local economic development. So some of the things I would suggest to overcome investment barriers is to look at how to address any skill or capacity gaps, improve coordination, uh, see if you can work with development banks to bring down high capital costs. Um, do things that will help address investors' risk perceptions, right? So that they don't see the Caribbean, Eastern Caribbean, as an elevated risk location. Think about limited investment ready projects. What projects can be brought to up that are ready, that are indeed set for success? And then lastly, I think there's a real need for strategic approaches such as establishing national ocean governance committees and implementing master plans for coastal development in the country islands of the Eastern Caribbean.
Thank you, Mark. Yes, so basically, if I can make a brief summary, you're talking about the importance of ownership. We really have to be very much involved with the priorities and aligned to the priorities of all these countries and work with local stakeholders, both at a regional level, such as IDB, but also CDB. And also you were mentioning the challenges. We've all kind of faced them. Data is something, and then when we talk about specific instruments, such as the debt for nature, we need KPIs. How do you build strong KPIs without the data? Climate change is both an opportunity to do things better, but also a constant reminder that the scenario is constantly changing, but also making things a bit more complicated. But for sure, if you consider that variable, it will make it more resilient. So it's always this balance about opportunities and complicated issues to consider it. But would you also be able to share a couple of sectors with us in which you believe we should be focusing? Because, of course, there are limited resources. There's also limited capacity, as you were mentioning. So which would be the sectors in which we should just maybe try to convey all our efforts and resources?
From our perspective as an organization that advises public companies investing, private equity investing, and fixed equity investing, the Eastern Caribbean offers several high potential sectors for blue economy partnerships. Sustainable tourism development presents immediate opportunities, particularly in ecotourism, yacht services, cruise facilities that incorporate environmental safeguards and real sustainability. Marine aquaculture shows strong promise, especially for high-value species like spiny lobster or various finfish, with existing successful operations providing proven business models. Renewable energy projects, especially offshore wind and ocean thermal energy conversion, align well with the region's push for energy independence and climate resilience. That's obviously going to become more and more important over time, particularly to avoid importing fuel for island energy production. We're also looking at port modernization and marine services that offer significant partnership potential as islands seek to upgrade their maritime infrastructure to meet international standards and enhance their competitive position. Sustainable fisheries management, including processing facilities and cold chain development, represents another critical sector with strong government support and clear market demand. Though nascent, I would also mention the marine biotech research and development, which shows some real promise, particularly in pharmaceutical applications and sustainable marine products. I think those are the best chances, best opportunities for the region.
Thank you, Mark. You really brought kind of very concrete and specific sectors. And I think it's the perfect transition to start the conversation with you, Brandon. Welcome. You're here representing the Cropper Foundation. And as we're seeking, opportunities in different sectors, I would like to find out with you, what are the best ways to ensure equitable benefits for all stakeholders? Because we've been talking about government, but also private sector. So how do we look for that when we talk about public and private partnerships in the blue economy?
All right. Let me first start by saying thanks, Jennifer. Thanks to the organizers for having me. And it's really interesting discussions that we have with the first two panelists, my colleagues there. I see public-private partnerships as a driver for building credibility in CTS, for example, as was talked about earlier on, as well as reinforcing trust for investors, right? And in terms of how you ensure these types of equitable benefits is, you can start off with inclusive stakeholder engagement. This is key, specifically engaging with marginalized groups. And I mean, how effective would PPPs be if it doesn't include a representation of those mostly affected? I mean, from the public sector perspective, it's wasting resources, and from the private sector, it's really undermining comparative advantage. Ensuring representation of these groups, and I am talking about the fishers, the coastal communities, women, indigenous peoples in decision-making processes is important, as they are most directly impacted by these issues related to marine resources and are frequently excluded from decision-making process. So how do you do that? Well, start off with inclusive consultation, establishing public forums, policy dialogues, this governance structures. This prevents their concerns from being overshadowed by larger or more resourceful stakeholders, but also consider capacity building, as was mentioned before, providing training and resources to marginalized groups so they can meaningfully contribute to these level of discussions. Of course, this includes technical knowledge of marine governance, sustainable resource management, and the rights within the blue economy. And this goes in line with what was presented earlier by the guest speaker on innovations and opportunities for sustainable aquaculture and fisheries. Conveying technical information is what I'm talking about here, like mean sustainable yield or integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, and what it means for these groups and their livelihoods. But also you can consider acknowledging traditional knowledge. So recognizing the invaluable insights of these groups bring through their lived experiences and traditional practices, which often align closely with sustainable resource use and conservation. But this often leads to co-designing solutions where stakeholders are part of developing policies and projects to reflect priorities and cultural values. As Mark mentioned, really in a synopsis is building ownership of these solutions.
Thank you, Brandon. And I'm really happy because certain concepts keep on bringing, the same kind of narrative. And we're talking about trust. You mentioned also co-design, because I guess that we used to talk about only public consultation. So we're gonna ask them what they think about. Maybe it's time now that we understand that it's not just asking them their opinion, but actually including them in the whole process, from scratch. Please participate in the process. And the fact that we need to acknowledge that each stakeholder has its value added is important. And as part of this, I'd like to understand, how do you feel that trust can also be built between NGOs and local governments? Because sometimes these are two different profiles. So how can these two become, best partners in crime, and understand that each one has a specific value added in every process?
Yeah, I can see that through three main forms as well. One is facilitating an enabling environment, I mean, through policies, of course. So advocating for policies that promote NGOs' participation in marine conservation, sustainable fisheries, these type of projects, of course, is there. Simplifying the bureaucratic processes, right? And I'm talking about streamlining the permitting and licensing process for NGOs to act on these blue economy projects. And also creating a partnership platform, right? Establishing a multi-stakeholder forum where NGOs can collaborate with local governments, even academia and private sector actors. But more than that, we could also consider things as offering training and technical support. So I'm talking about equipping NGOs here with the knowledge and tools needed to navigate marine governance, environmental policy, and sustainable funding strategies within the blue economy. It's funny that you say that because the Cropper Foundation, as one of our core strategic actions, is to empower our compadres in development by leveraging on digital technologies and data science tools to support advocacy efforts. And this is for both, the people on planet. But recently we concluded a project that enabled over 20 CSOs to adopt innovative technologies as something as simple as a chatbot or even using natural language processing to actually advocate for some of these initiatives, right? Of course, these advancements help build a capacity to address critical challenges in the blue economy and strengthen, well, our CSO goal network as well.
Thank you, Brandon. And really, it's interesting how, you answered some of the challenges that Mark was underlining. That we need training. So certain NGOs are just there for that. They can do the training. Let's, benefit from their value added, their knowledge. And you were also mentioning the enabling environment. How do we do better with that? And that's where I'd like to now go to Melanie. Melanie, you're here representing Canary. So I'd like to know, how do you foresee this? How can governance frameworks and policies be designed to maximize equitable benefits for Caribbean communities, especially when we're talking about the Eastern Caribbean and the potential for blue economy?
Yes. Thanks for the question, Jennifer, and thank you as well to the organizers for the opportunity to be on the panel. To respond to your question, I'm actually going to draw on some work that Canary has been doing in the sustainable blue tourism space. So of course, we know within the blue economy, the tourism is a very prominent sector for the Caribbean. Of course, our tourism model has hinged largely on mass tourism for many years. You're looking at large resorts and of course importing a lot of products to kind of maintain the quality of external brands. But what we have been looking at in terms of sustainable blue tourism is getting down to community-based tourism and looking at how community-based tourism can be a pathway to sustainable blue tourism. So in terms of governance and policy, we've done some work that came up with a few policy recommendations, 10. I will not go through all 10, but just to highlight that, there are needed reforms in terms of policies and laws and even structures, and how these can better, integrate or support community-based tourism. So I'll just give an example. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, they have recently done an ecotourism policy. It's in draft. Hopefully it will be approved. But that has taken a very strong focus on community-based tourism. And I think this is a very good example, of how we can use these types of instruments or policies to support community-based blue tourism and, more sustainable and inclusive modes of tourism. Another example I wanted to share was in St. Lucia, where they have actually legally established what they call their St. Lucia Community Tourism Agency. So these types of structures, of course, they are directly related and responsible for supporting community-based tourism. And these are models that I think we need to replicate more widely even throughout the Caribbean. So, the Community Tourism Agency in St. Lucia is still fairly new, but I think, there's a lot of probably lessons learned and good recommendations that could come out, like I said, to kind of replicate and, even upscale some of these types of efforts in terms of good governance and policy. With respect, another aspect I wanted to highlight as well, and it's not new, but we talk about multi-stakeholder mechanisms, where we are seeking to be more inclusive with how we make decisions. And I think this is also an important aspect in terms of supporting community engagement in making decisions. So even at their own community levels, encouraging communities, one, to establish their own types of communities, committees rather, where they may invite, for example, government stakeholders to participate, or even where government stakeholders establish these national intersectoral committees and invite community representatives to be on these types of mechanisms. So just two examples that I wanted to kind of share there in terms of, good governance and maybe policy approaches.
Thank you, Melanie. Yes, I would totally agree with you. And just to show you also an example we've done after the Debt for Nature conversion in Barbados, it allowed us to understand that they required also a national ocean policy, which was therefore drafted after the transaction. So sometimes, yes, you don't have a clear path, and one size doesn't fit all, but it is important that we share these lessons learned and ensure that, yes, all stakeholders are participating and in a practical way. So thank you for that. I don't know if you wanted to add another example on practical ways to include communities and stakeholders.
Yeah, so, well, Canarias, I guess a kind of tried and true approach that we kind of use in terms of how we engage with communities. We have some even pipeline initiatives where we'll be testing these even further. But one aspect I think we need to focus on as well is just kind of demystifying the blue economy for communities. Sometimes I feel, they can feel like it's happening outside of them and not kind of really appreciate that they've forever been a part of the blue economy, through tourism, small-scale fisheries, and other maritime activities that they've been engaged in. So I think to just welcome them back into the fold and, help them understand as well that they are a part of this and they have a say in how this blue economy, the sustainable blue economy, unfolds. So one of the ways we've been doing that is directly engaging with communities to do their own local community planning, so local blue economy planning. And a part of that, might simply be helping them to identify what are some of their blue economy assets. They have coral reefs, they might have mangroves, they might be involved in tourism or their coastal and marine tourism potential. So helping them to identify these assets as well as identify what might be some of the issues around their own local blue economy that they might want to address. So this could be in terms of stewardship, even maybe, supporting them with doing ecosystem restoration work, helping them strengthen their own local green and blue enterprises that might be around small-scale fisheries, around tourism. And so Canary, we work with the communities to develop these types of plans, right? So they themselves kind of see it before their eyes. What are the issues? What are the resources we need? Who do we need to partner with to address some of these issues? And then where it's possible for us, so our projects, we provide small grants or mentoring to help them start implementing some of these priority actions. So I think that kind of approach, again, they see themselves within this broader blue economy vision. And as well, they see themselves being empowered to take action, and being provided with the resources and the support that they need.
Thank you very much, Melanie. And I think you really make a good point. The fact that, we have all these branding strategies now, and they can sometimes disenfranchise the people that were already doing the work. The blue economy has always been there. Now that we're branding it as such, we shouldn't take away, the power and the work that most of these people have already been doing for a while. So thank you very much for that insight. And I've seen that while we were speaking, some people were already answering to some of the questions. Thank you very much, Mark, for that. Quite efficient. But I think there's one question I'd like to go back to, and I think Slav, that was for you. How do we include any result-based financing incentives? So I think, well, the Debt for Nature conversions are incentive-based. I think that when we have a target, we really have, a specific result in mind. So I don't know if you would like to answer to that, because I think that as of now, it's the only question we have pending.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And incentives, yeah, people respond to incentives, right? We do our work, we get up every day because we want to feed our families and we're motivated by the work that we do, etc. And so the same is true also on a macro level. And so you want to create the right incentives for businesses, for governments, even for the world as a whole. And so, and there are different ways that you can approach it, right? You could, for example, begin, shall we say, with the presumption of guilt versus presumption of innocence. So if you start with the presumption of guilt, um, somewhat jokingly by that I mean that you're not necessarily assuming that people will do the right thing, and you want to nudge them right in the direction of doing the right thing. And so that nudge, for example, can be, additional grants that can flow into, let's say, a conservation fund if all goes well. Reduced interest payments is a classic one, right? So, a form of the so-called sustainability linked issuances, bonds or loans, actually points to reducing interest rates if performance is satisfactory and KPIs are met, right? And so another way to approach it, right, is to deliver the rewards upfront, which is the approach of debt conversions, where the savings are crystallized upfront for the government in exchange, right, for commitments, for KPIs, and that's the presumption of innocence, if you will, that the government is committed to protecting, let's say, 30% of its ocean. And then there are consequences, potentially more, shall we say, not so much carrots, but rather sticks types of consequences for not meeting those commitments, which is another form of incentive, right? So, another way to structure sustainability linked issuances is not through a interest reduction, but rather through an interest increase, right? If a company or a country does not meet its KPIs. So there are different, in other words, there are different ways to approach it. Nothing should be cookie cutter. Everything should really be bespoke for the situation that we're trying to solve.
Thank you, Slav. That was quite the metaphor. But yes, I'll stick to the incentives part, the carrot or the blue economy opportunity. And then I would like to say thank you to all of you. It was a pleasure to have you. You all brought something very important to the conversation. I was happy to see that there were common concepts brought over and over by all of you. And it is important sometimes to just, say things over and over again because they might seem obvious, but they're still not that obvious to all of us. So looking forward to keep on partnering with you for these events or other deals in the region. But thank you very much, everyone. Sania, I'll turn this back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you again to our panelists, Mark, Brandon, Melanie, and Slav, and of course to you, Jennifer, our moderator, for those important, very insightful interventions that readily speak to the operationalization of the concepts themselves within the context of the blue economy. So thank you again to this panel for all your insights. Next, we will have the third and final country presentation, and this one will be by the Investment Promotion Agency of St. Lucia. After that session, we will have a 1 hour break for lunch. And so we are inviting and encouraging all you participants to return for the afternoon session, which will begin at 1 p.m. sharp Eastern Standard Time. Remember, there's some time differences that we're working here. So we're coming back at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we will have two interesting themed panels, as well as a period that's dedicated to some virtual interaction using our virtual platform. You'll be able to click on the tabs and enter the virtual booth. It's the Expo tab. If you don't see it at the top, and you see 3 dots, click on those 3 dots and you will see the Expo tab there. So you'll be able to interact virtually. A reminder that the exhibitors will not be available during the lunch period, but they would be for the entire rest of the afternoon. So enjoy your lunch, see you for the afternoon session, and do join our final country presentation that's right up after this. Thank you.